Okay, so what we're going to do today is go out and just kind of look at some of the environment around the school and think about the biological community that's here. You will need something to write on because we're going to make some lists of living things that we see. And we're going to talk about disturbance and stability and community. So, hold. You're not going to get your study guides today. You're going to get a very much shortened study guide tomorrow. You'll have one period to work on it. It will be due at the end of the period, and I'll give you the answer key. Your quiz will be on Thursday. It's going to be a short quiz because Thursday we're on basically a 2-hour delay schedule in reverse because we've got a lot of classes in the afternoon. So it's going to be a relatively short quiz. But today I just want to go out and talk about some stuff. I would suggest that you take your iPads. You will not need internet, but you can at least take some notes, some pictures using Doceri, and you can document some of what we're seeing today. Okay? Questions?
Can you take pictures on my phone?
No. Word here. Do you see a lot of different species in this area? So remember something that is grass a species of plant?
Yes.
Yes. And there are actually multiple species of grass. Most of this is probably one. I think this might be a different one. Here, come on. Come in the grass. It won't kill you. Here's another species. We've got a little weed species of some sort. Take a picture of something that isn't grass. Got to be a species out here, not human. Yeah, I know. Find something here that's not grass. Oh, I found clovers. Is there a lot of variety here? Okay. I would say there's definitely not a lot of variety here. No.
But they get some scenery.
What you did capture is that shrub there, that shrubby tree thing. That's actually a native shrub. It's called serviceberry, Amelanchier canadensis. And so we've got, I counted basically 3 species in this whole area. You want to keep walking so we stay warm?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. Okay, so what do you see in this picture, in this scene?
Trees and bare.
Okay, in the foreground I see a lot of bare dirt. In the background I see beautiful woods. In the foreground right now I see cold students. They're shivering, but their lips haven't turned blue yet, so it's okay to stay out until their lips turn blue. Okay, so what do you think that area that's just bare dirt now looked like before it was bare dirt?
Middle school.
It was the middle school. Before it was the middle school.
Grass and trees, probably.
Okay, grass and trees. And before it was grass and trees, look off in the distance. What do you see?
Trees.
Trees. If you let any place around here just go, what does it turn into? Forest. Just forest. Now I don't know if we're allowed to, we'll walk through the grass. Come on. We're gonna circumnavigate the building. What do you see back there?
Grass and trees.
Grass and trees, golf course, some buildings. If we just let it go, what would it look like?
Grass and trees.
It'd be what?
Grass.
Your mouth a little bit cold, you can't talk right?
Grass and trees.
Grass and trees.
Forest, pretty much.
Forest, okay.
Animals would come back.
Animals would come back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You said trass and grease.
Trash and grease. This is what happens when your mouth is full. You can't talk anymore. Okay, so what do you see there? A lot of trees. Nice dense woods. Beautiful sunrise. Soccer field. Okay. If nothing was done with the soccer field in time, what would it start to look like?
Trees behind it.
The woods behind it? Nice.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so we agree that, those sites, the golf course and the soccer field and the dirt lot next door, were disturbed. What did they look like before they were disturbed?
Baseball fields, trees, forest.
Okay, we can go back a little bit and we can say baseball fields, the middle school. We might go back a little bit further and say farm field. But if we go back, that's going back 10,000 years. If we go back really far, we start to say, it was probably a forest. And at every single point where I asked you, if we just left this alone, what would it look like eventually? You guys said forest. So it's kind of like it would return to what it was. And that's exactly the idea we're talking about. It's called succession. So as you finish up, I would ask you to open up your notes and look at the slide marked succession. So there are two kinds of succession. There's primary and there's secondary. And what we're talking about here is we've got an intact biological community. We've got, lots of species living in one place, like a forest or like a pond or like a coral reef. And something happens and it disturbs that. So in the case of like the bare lot next door, 200 years ago, that was probably, 300 years ago, it was probably a forest. And settlers came along, and we said they cut down all the trees, killed all the wolves, killed all the bears, killed all the mountain lions. That's a disturbance. That's a heck of a disturbance. And then for a long time, that was probably farm fields. And that's their own kind of community with rabbits and groundhogs living on the edges. And then eventually, it was bulldozed and made into a school. And that's a whole different kind of disturbance. Right now, it's bulldozed down to flat ground, and you guys all said, if you just let it go, eventually it would just turn into woods. That's what happens. That is succession. And we can actually predict what species will come in first, what species will start to develop. So if nobody touched that dirt lot next door, what do you think would be some of the first things that popped up? Grass. I would put some money on dandelions. Dandelions are a great early species. Has anybody here ever hiked through an overgrown farm field and gotten their clothes torn to shreds by what? Jaggers and thorns and multiflora rose. That's a predictable stage in the pathway from bare dirt ground back to a full-grown forest. We call that an early succession stage, and it is the most miserable kind of hiking you could ever do. I have had stuff ripped to shreds, doing field work and hiking through areas where it's just jaggers, just miles and miles of horrible, horrible jaggers. So that's a stage, and it's predictable. And we know that eventually trees start to grow up, and they shade out those multiflora rose and those blackberries and all those things that are sort of jaggery and tear your clothes. And then we start to have woods. And we can even look at woods and say, that's old forest. That's relatively young forest. Just like we look at a person and say, that person's probably, 8 or 10 years old. That's a teenager. That's a young adult. That's somebody in middle age. Same thing applies when we look at a forest system. Okay, so of those two types of succession, primary succession, what does primary mean? First. So primary succession is the first time that life arises, the first biological community that happens in a place. And that basically means it's happening where there's no soil. So if we have a brand new volcanic island, no soil on it, that's primary succession. If we have straight rock, just pure rock, it's been scraped clean by a glacier, and there's no soil on it, that would be primary succession. Sand dunes are primary succession because there's no soil. There's not been any living things on those dunes. And we talk a little bit less about this. It's a little bit less interesting, honestly. But it takes a long time to go from no living community ever to a full, vibrant climax community, whatever your climax community is. So this is the next slide. It just talks a little bit about primary succession. But I'm just going to tell you the thing I want you to really know about primary succession is that it's slow. It's just darned slow. There's no soil. All plants need sun and soil. Those are the basics for plants to grow. And primary succession is so slow because before you can really have a community, you have to build soil. This is the thing that we want to talk about more, secondary succession. So secondary succession is the process where a biological community regrows. So one that's been disturbed, grows after it has been disturbed. And there are lots of ways to disturb biological communities. A forest after a fire would be an example of where you'd see secondary succession. An old farm field is a place where you would see secondary succession. Or just a vacant city lot. Okay, so and when we say like an old farm field is an example of secondary succession, if you just let an old farm field go, what does it turn into? Around here? Forest. First it starts to have all those jaggers and multiflora rose and blackberries that tear your clothes, and then eventually, in 50 years, it's going to look like a forest. In 100 years, you're probably not going to know that there was a farm field there. How many of you have had the experience of hiking through woods and finding old equipment or old fence lines? When I did watershed work, and we were trying to figure out property lines, we'd be hiking through the woods and you'd see like old rotten fence posts and strands of barbed wire. Guess what? That was not always forest. That's something that was a farm field 100 years ago. And you look at it now and you go, well, it doesn't look much like farm field now. That's because biological communities grow back. You disturb them, they grow back. It's like those punching bag dolls, the clowns with the weight in the bottom. Do they still make those? You punch them and they fall down and they come back up, and you punch them and they go down and they go back up, and that's how a biological community works. You disturb it, you break it, you mess it all up, it comes back. It regrows. Now, we talked, remember yesterday, about how resilient a biological community was. The more resilient they are, the faster they regrow. The more closely they regrow, looking like the original. So let's talk a little bit about that. Left alone to do its own thing, around here anyway, it takes about 100 years to regrow a biological community. It's about the span of a human life. Has anybody watched I forget what cable channel it was on. It was called Life After Man.
Yeah, I think I saw it.
Anybody seen that? Okay. I'm obsessed with stuff like that. I'll be honest. And here's the vision I want to share with you. I want to completely wreck your thinking. So I was in high school. I was standing on a track in Columbiana. And I looked around and I thought, what would this look like if all the humans disappeared today? What would it look like in 100 years? And I suddenly had this image of like trees growing up through the field house, and trees in the middle of the track, and broken curbs under roots, and trees growing up through the stands, and like this weird wreckage in the middle of this wilderness. So I think it's a lot of fun because I'm that kind of crazy geeky weirdo. To look at, stand in the parking lot at Giant Eagle and think, what would this look like if, poof, all the humans disappeared? What kind of wilderness would there be here with like these weird buildings, like partially, hidden by trees and roots and vegetation? Because if humans just walked away, that's what would happen. That's succession. And the Life After Humans series is a really awesome series. If you get a chance, if you see that that's running someplace, I need to try to find some episodes. it's a neat idea. Okay. So that's the big idea, is that secondary is a lot faster. It might take 100 years to completely go through secondary succession. It might take 1,000 years. So, pictures of Hawaii. Who has ever seen a picture of Hawaii? Okay. This was bare volcanic rock at one point. How many living things can you count in that picture? Billions, and there's billions more you can't count. It's amazing. I mean, it's dense and lush. And this was bare volcanic rock. That didn't take 100 years. That took thousands of years. That took a lot longer because primary succession is very slow because first you have to build soil. Okay, pioneer species are those first species that arrive in any place. And they're usually small, they're usually fast growing. You all nailed it when we said, what would show up first in that bare lot next door, and you all said, dandelions? Grass? Yeah, those are pioneer species. They're small, they're fast growing. Dandelions can go from germinating to producing seed of their own in a very short time. This one is called plantain. It's a really, it's one of my favorites. And it's a non-native. It came from Europe. It came on the boots of Europeans and the mud on their shoes. So did dandelions. And the main pioneer species in primary successions are lichens.
I'll go this way.